man.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
morning.
There's always a story. And if you change the story, you change the world. For Gareth and I, Sir Terry Pratchett is one of the greatest fantasy writers of all time. So I'm going to give you your first takeaway. Pick up a Pratchett book. That's your first takeaway from the conference. Sir Terry was a prolific writer who saw the story in everything. But what's it got to do with data and analytics? Simply this. Data and analytics requires not only technology, but it also requires storytelling and imagination.
Let me give you an example. This is Tycho Brahe. He was fascinated by the motion of the sun, and he also held deeply held convictions about the importance of data. His sophisticated experiments and the clarity of his observations make him one of the greatest scientists of all time. But despite his brilliant mind and methods, he spent his life trying to understand just one thing. What causes the sun to revolve around the earth? Ooh, bad question. Built on a very bad assumption, and therefore impossible to answer. When Tycho Brahe died in 1601, his last words were, "May it not seem that I have lived my life in vain." But those words were recorded by his assistant, Johannes Kepler. And it was Kepler who discovered the three basic laws of planetary motion using the data created by Tycho Brahe. Kepler began his breakthrough work with just one single thought. What if the Earth revolves around the sun? Then what does the data say? By omitting the uncertainty about the relative movement of the Earth and the sun, he was able to achieve what Tycho Brahe had not, and unleash the innovative thinking that would take people to the moon. Now, I love this story because it's a great reminder that when faced with uncertainty, sometimes all we need to do is change our perspective, use our imagination to change the story. Because as Sir Terry said, it is imagination and not intelligence that makes us human. A very warm welcome to you all. I'm Gareth Herschel, a Brit who lives here in America.
And I'm Debra Logan, an American who lives in the UK.
Symmetry.
Yeah. We're both Pratchett fans, and together we figured that we have 50 years of experience in data and analytics. He's earned that beard. Our theme this year is Unleash Innovation and Transform Uncertainty. No doubt, we've faced a lot of uncertainty in the last couple of years. And I think that most of us are probably coming to the conclusion that that's not going to change. We live in a world of perpetual uncertainty. It's not a phase or a transition, and there's not going to be a return to the new normal. And there's not going to be, or the old normal, there's not going to be a new normal either, right? So businesses that can handle that uncertainty are the ones that will navigate the future most successfully. Because a world of perpetual uncertainty is a world of perpetual change. And that changing world demands new ways of thinking and new problem solving. So what do we need? We need innovation. Innovation goes beyond creativity. Creativity is having a really great idea. Innovation is about using that idea to respond to and to drive change. Innovation is creativity plus execution. Many of you have told us your biggest challenge is to get people to use your analysis to drive change. As the pandemic has shown us, organizations that are unable or unwilling to change are not going to survive. The need for data and analytics has accelerated because change itself has accelerated again.
So today, we want to discuss the two areas where you need to drive innovation in the face of this uncertainty. Number one, be innovative within our own teams. What will you do to drive innovation in what you do and how you do it? And number two, enable innovation throughout our organizations. How will you be agents of change to drive business results? So let's put some of those uncertainties on the table.
Okay. First, as data professionals, we should always be asking ourselves, not only are we collecting, integrating, and storing our data in the best possible way, we need to ask whether we're creating, collecting the right kind of data in the first place.
We need to ask ourselves whether our analytics are finding the right insights in that data, something that the lack of AI explainability is going to make ever harder.
And as we think about our relationship with the rest of our organization, we have to ask ourselves about the role of data in decision-making. Are we having the influence that we should be having?
And we need to think about exactly how much the rest of our organization will hate us if we bring up the topic of governance again.
Okay. But for the next few minutes, let's take each of these areas in turn and look at them from new perspectives. Start with data.
For a few years, we thought we wanted big data. So we got really innovative in how we integrated and managed huge volumes of data. Now, we don't even call it big data anymore. But the bad habit of wanting all the data we could gather kind of stayed with us. Can anyone guess what the world record for memorizing pi in decimal places is? What do you think? 50? 500? 5,000? It's actually over 70,000 decimal places. Can you believe that? Now, there's no question that's an amazing achievement, but the question is, so what? Right? With only 39 digits of pi, you can calculate the circumference of the universe to within the margin of error of the diameter of a single atom. So apart from being able to claim a world record, what is the value of knowing that? That is big data thinking. More is always better. My data is bigger than yours. We had a fear of missing out if we didn't collect all the data that we could, right? And the cloud enabled some bad habits by giving us unlimited space to store everything we thought we wanted.
But give me all the data isn't a strategy. We shouldn't just be data plumbers, laying pipelines from storage to source. We should also act as our organization's data concierge, guiding people to the source of data that meets their needs, the right insight for every need and every occasion. And for a very long time, we've been describing data as an asset. But data can also be a liability. Data costs us money. It carries risk. And that's the definition of a liability. So how can we ensure that the data we have is an asset and not a liability? How can we ensure that the data we have is used to drive business results? The truth is, we don't necessarily want lots of data. What we want is the right data, the data that makes us smarter. And we can get it in 3 ways.
First, by knowing what we already have. We have no shortage of data. But we do have a scarcity of accurate metadata. And without metadata, we don't have meaningful data, because we don't know what we have, we don't know what it means, and we don't know where it came from. Now, traditionally, metadata required a lot of effort to maintain it in an accurately usable form. But by applying machine learning to our metadata, we can transform it into active metadata. Active metadata continually detects and adjusts to the patterns in our data. And this enables self-organizing and self-optimizing design concepts such as the data fabric. Now, this is not only a more efficient data management environment, but it also drives usage. Here is just a few examples of how the data fabric adds value. It allows data science teams to identify data drift. That's often the result of changing customer behaviors, something we've seen for the last few years, And it's a great prompt to our data scientists to refresh their predictive models. Active metadata can also notify our data engineers that certain use cases are generating new categories of data. And if the same data is being used by multiple people across the organization, it probably tells us that the decisions they're making are interrelated. The second thing we can do is look for small data substitutes. Give a cook a recipe and they can follow it. I like to think I'm a chef. If I'm out of an ingredient, I know what to substitute so it tastes just as good. In our case, as we look at the data we're collecting and storing, is there other data that would be better, more accurate, safer, cheaper, more accessible? And could we use that data instead of the data that we collect and use by habit? Never underestimate the power of small data to be more insightful than the most comprehensive assembly of big data. Just like a minimum viable product is enough to get the job done, we should aspire to the creation of a minimum viable data set. Right? Now, a great example of this was a hotel that wanted to understand the health habits of its guests. Instead of complex demographic or psychographic analysis, they looked at just two things: whether their guests swiped into the hotel gym, and whether they ordered salad or chocolate cake from room service. Simple data with a clear signal. So here's my challenge. How innovative can we be in figuring out the smallest amount of data that tells us what we need to know? Going on a data diet can be healthy. Cutting out the junk data that bloats our systems, costs us money, raises our data risk, and distracts us from the nutritious data that will help us grow. Sometimes less is truly more.
But sometimes more is also more, and I can't believe I'm saying that. We need to be able to look at our world in a fundamentally different way, and new data brings us new perspectives, which takes us to our third opportunity, to identify the data that makes us smarter. Increasingly, some of the most valuable data is going to be data we create and not data we collect. Synthetic data is artificially created data, and it has similar attributes to the data that it mimics. This isn't a new idea, but it's becoming increasingly important for two reasons. First, we can use synthetic data to reduce our data liability. We estimate that by 2025, synthetic data will enable organizations to avoid 70% of privacy violation sanctions. So if you have customer data or patient data that you'd like to use but you can't, you could replace it with synthetic data without losing any of the insights that you would have got from the data. This works well to share across country boundaries or in healthcare, where accessing patient data has to be run by the regulators. Synthetic data sets can be almost instantly, created and analyzed to do the same thing. Yep. In the UK, the Nationwide Building Society used its transaction data to quickly generate synthetic data sets to share with model builders without compromising customer privacy. Secondly, synthetic data enables us to move faster and fill the gaps in our actual data. Gartner estimates that by 2030, the majority of data that we use to build models will be, in fact, synthetic data. And this is crucial in the world of AI and model building, where our data often lacks rare target variables. Amazon, for example, is using synthetic data to support languages such as Brazilian Portuguese, data that would have taken much longer to collect and been much more expensive if they had done that in real life. Google's self-driving subsidiary, Waymo, is using synthetic simulations of different driving conditions to drive the equivalent of 20 million miles a day. It's also able to simulate circumstances like needing to get out of the way of an ambulance that's roaring up behind you. So start investigating synthetic data, because today's use cases of reduced data risk are going to become tomorrow's use cases of better predictive models.
That's true. When we think about data and innovation, we usually think about the innovations that our organizations have been able to create with the data. But starting this week, we should also think about being innovative in the way we collect and create data itself. Data management must be an exercise in creativity, not just connectivity. So what should you do? Don't just think of data as an asset, where we automatically add value by collecting more of it, but recognize that it risks being a liability that we and only we can control. So stop collecting data just in case, and challenge yourself to substitute big data with small data, real data with synthetic data, and ensure your active metadata tells you not only what you have, but also what it means. Because once we have the right data, we are in a position to create some amazing insights and actions.
So let's talk about the power of analytics. Who would have thought that social media giants would be able to predict what we like better than our closest friends and family? And that specialized AIs can not only beat us at every single game that we have ever invented, like chess and Go and all them, and poker, but can also invent games in the physical world, like Speedgate. That's amazing.
Sorry. And this is, I'm just still thinking about Speedgate and playing Speedgate.
Yeah.
And this is not just about the most advanced AI. Augmented analytics is becoming a standard part of our analytics toolkit. In fact, 82% of organizations have adopted augmented analytics or plan to before the end of the year. However, not enough organizations are really using these capabilities to their full advantage. Too often we use these new tools to do old tasks, like running reports or creating charts. If you want to get imaginative, this is the story I would tell to convince your colleagues about the power of augmented analytics. Imagine that you are an explorer, and you can deploy a swarm of drones to investigate a strange new world. They come back with only the most interesting discoveries for further investigation. Our colleagues, the data scientists, business analysts, and other analytic consumers throughout our organization, they are the explorers. And augmented analytics is the drone swarm that we have unleashed on our data to discover the patterns and outliers that merit further investigation. An insurance company looking for outliers realized that ambulance trips for kids were ridiculously expensive because the ambulance companies were charging by the person, not by the trip. And parents naturally wanted to ride along with their child. That's the power of augmented analytics. Augmented analytics frees people to focus on what they're good at, enabling them to filter out the noise and focus on only the most important signal. It's like something from science fiction, except it isn't science fiction, it's data science. Analytics is a science in which we continually develop and improve our understanding and then develop new techniques to refine it even further. Now, AI already enables all sorts of life-enhancing use cases, like personalized medical treatments and reducing our environmental footprint with smart buildings. But the power of analytics can also raise false expectations, and it does place an unnecessary burden on our analytics teams.
So there are conflicting strategies in human psychology. They're called maximizing and satisficing. Maximizing personalities seek the absolute best answer to whatever question is asked. They look at all the options, they check all the data, and they run all the numbers. And this does absolutely give you the best answer. But the truth is that even a maximizing strategy doesn't yield the perfect answer, just the best one that comes from the data that we have. And that's always going to be imperfect and incomplete.
Yep.
If you ever want to stop analytics project in its tracks, I'll tell you what to say. That's a great idea. Let's just clean the data first. You disappear for 2 years. That's it. Sometimes we don't need the best answer. That's the point.
Now, I confess, I am a bit of a maximizer, which is why on a family holiday, I dragged my hungry family across a small German city to go to the best restaurant in town, instead of listening to my wife and going to the perfectly good restaurant that was right next door to the hotel. Good enough is not a phrase we hear often enough with analytics. Now, the technical term for it is satisficing. And that means finding a satisfactory or sufficient answer. Maximizing yields the best outcome, but satisficing yields the greatest happiness. Satisficers are happier than maximizers. And we as humans have a tendency to overcomplicate things. An interesting study showed that when given the choice between improving something either by adding to it or simplifying it, 80% of people made it more complicated. So what does that mean for us?
Well, it means that we shouldn't just think of data analytics as a science designed to maximize our outcomes. We also need to think of it as an art. Art is a lens for interpreting the world in different ways, and more insightful ways. So I wonder, how many of you already think of yourselves as something of an artist? In my career, I've met lots of technical artists, and they were among the best developers, data scientists, and architects that I've known. When we think of analytics as an art, we're prompted to take two actions. First, we have to increase our focus on identifying the right question, not just the right answer, because one purpose of art is to provoke and to challenge, and that's generally achieved much better with questions than it is with answers. Good analysis, like a good teacher, answers questions. But just like great teachers, great analysis can prompt us to ask new and better questions. Who's buying our product is a question we all ask, and we have to, and we can get really, really deep into answering it. But who's buying our product that doesn't look anything like the people we know already buy our product? That's a great question, because we can identify new market segments. Questions like, do we have the right inventory levels? Are good, and we have to know those things. But why do we need that level of inventory? That's a great question. Data artists create great questions, just like data science creates great answers, and we need both.
And the second thing I think we can learn from applying art to analytics is that art is fundamentally subjective, and so is analytics. Novelist Toni Morrison says, all art is knowing when to stop. Analytic systems seek to continually improve their answer towards perfection, but at a certain point we need to know when to stop. Would a Mozart symphony or a Shakespearean sonnet be better if it was longer? Whether good enough is good enough also depends on the context. For a decision maker, an approximation in the next 5 minutes may be worth more than the exact answer in 5 hours. And sometimes saying like 5 to 10% is more accurate than saying 6.7%. Every question answered potentially leaves a different question unanswered. So do we spend another hour answering this question, or spend that hour investigating a different question? Let me tell you about somebody who did this really well. It's the main public transport company in Brussels, and they had a problem. The buses would wear out unpredictably, leading to breakdowns and delays. Management hypothesized that the problem was down to cowboy bus drivers. Heavy on the gas, heavier on the brakes. And the BI team was like, So they reorganized their schedules. So they had 10 to 20% of their time available specifically for innovation. And that is a best practice we've seen many innovation-driven companies actually following. They also took a lesson from Scrum techniques, and they time-boxed their project, spending no more than 10 days on data prep and no more than 10 days on model development. Their plan was to use the bus's telemetry data to predict breakdowns before they happened. They could uncover hidden correlations, and so they decided to learn and apply some deep learning techniques. But that didn't actually work. It wasn't that they couldn't build a good predictive model. They couldn't find any pattern at all. But because they had time-boxed their project and accepted the risk of failure that's associated with any innovation, they were able to move on. They didn't get bogged down trying to prove a point, trying to fix the data. Now, an additional benefit was that they developed a trusted relationship with the operations team who could see that they had the integrity not to force that result where they couldn't genuinely find one. So when the BI team identified just a list of the buses most prone to breaking down, the operations team recognized that those buses were always assigned to run in the hilliest parts of the city. So they rotated the buses to run in every part of the city, and they saved 40 million euros each year, snatching operational success from the jaws of statistical defeat.
Analytic innovation isn't just the science of coming up with ever more sophisticated answers. Nobody doubts the ability of our machines to answer difficult mathematical questions. So what should you be thinking about if you really want to drive innovation using analytics? I've said it before, we need to combine art and science. First, we need to use augmented analytics to see possible patterns in our data. We can then think like an artist by coming up with the most profound questions, not just the right answers. And those answers, they need to be fit for purpose, good enough to get the job done without being overly elaborate. In other words, good enough to drive a decision.
Because once we have great answers to our great questions, the remaining uncertainty is whether our analysis will actually be used. Will our data drive decisions that result in change? Now, I said at the beginning that we need to be innovative in two domains. Our own, being innovative in how we collect and create data and how we do our analysis, but also in how we unleash innovation throughout our organization. That is why we need to talk about decisions, because decisions are the moments when other people use our analysis to change the future. What do you think about this? I recently read a study that reported a vegetarian diet is associated with a 19% lower risk of heart failure. I also know that in 2008, researchers found that meditating was associated with a 35% lower risk of high cholesterol. Now, how many of you, based on this knowledge, think that I have converted to a vegetarian diet and started meditating regularly?
No one.
No one. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, none of you. Thanks for the vote of confidence there, guys. But you're right. Changing behaviors is hard. That's why most New Year's resolutions have been broken by mid-February. So we cannot just collect data and create analysis and then hope it's used. Right? We have to start our thinking about data and analysis by understanding how we can influence the way decisions are made. That doesn't mean you have to be like Machiavellian about it, right? You may not be the decision makers, but we should be the decision designers, making it easier for decisions to be made with data than without. In fact, some data and analytics teams are hiring behavioral psychologists and graphic designers specifically to help their data scientists and data engineers find the best ways to influence the rest of the organization.
So let's look at 3 ways that you can define better decisions. First of all, timing of decisions. In 2020, we did a survey about decision-making, and 89% of executives agreed with the statement, any decision is better than no decision at all, which explains a lot, in my opinion. Executives are primed to want to make decisions. That's their job. They execute on things. But often, our analysis is out of sync with what they need. Traditionally, we've used reporting tools to alert decision makers to issues. However, what our research shows moving forward is that organizations are planning to use augmented analytics tools and proactively deliver analysis to decision makers. In fact, we think that's likely to double over the coming year, so that's pretty big. By providing analysis to decision makers exactly when they need it, we can make sure that our analysis is more likely to be used. Even better, we can flip the script and use our analysis to prompt a decision, making it clear to decision makers that there's an opportunity here, or a threat or a challenge, that requires them to make a decision. And our ability to help in a crisis or realize an opportunity can be worth millions, because the earlier we can identify the upcoming issue, the more and better options we have to respond to that issue.
Secondly, we can accelerate decisions. For growing organizations or those looking to streamline operations, decision augmentation or automation may be the angle we pursue. Providing decision makers with recommendations that they can accept or reject can enable us to automate repetitive or time-sensitive decisions, and that will also deliver real significant business benefits. Marketing offers to customers that are made in real time are twice as successful as those made just a short time later, and 10 times more successful than those made without considering the customer's current context. Embedding analytics into business processes is not new. But increasingly, this work is being done by business technologists using composable analytics and composable applications. It's not being done by application developers. And we see this approach being adopted in almost every business function, from HR to procurement, from marketing to customer service. And at the bleeding edge, we see organizations replacing unique AI models with composite AI models that capture the behavior of experts and apply that automated behavior in multiple similar situations.
And here's the third way to make better decisions. We can make decisions better by connecting them. Traditionally, a lot of our analysis has been about specific decisions with very limited scope in many cases. Should I approve this transaction? How do I optimize my call center workforce levels? Things like that. But our organizations are increasingly digitized, and we have automated capabilities to do process mining. So now we're in a position to connect the decisions across a network of influence and impact that enables us to optimize the whole, not just the parts of our organization. This may sound very ambitious, but let me tell you a story about a large hospital in the US. Although everybody shared the same goals of wanting to increase patient care, make patient care better, and increase efficiency, I bet you can imagine the arguments they were having between departments about who got what, who got the money, who got the space, all of that stuff. And of course, they all had the data that supported their position. Funny, isn't that? That happens quite often. We're right, we have the data. To help settle the argument, they created a digital twin of the hospital that highlighted the real-time interactions between the departments, including both unpredictable events like trauma care and planned events such as scheduled operations. As a result, they were able to develop better procedures in allocating operating room space and justification for 2 new operating rooms. This data-driven approach provided 2 benefits. First of all, it took the emotional component, or at least reduced the emotional component from the decision. Second, the visualization they created helped build more confidence in the data. All of this enabled them to tell the story more easily, convincing the right decision makers that this was the right decision, and it was also the right way to make the decision.
So how do we make better decisions? Just as we have learned not to separate data from analytics, but to draw ever tighter connections between them, we need to create the same tight connection between data and analytics and decisions. So become decision designers. Plan to get the right insights to decision makers at exactly the time they need it to make the decision. Drive better outcomes by accelerating decisions through augmentation or automation. And, if you're really ambitious, think of the big picture. How do we connect our organizational decisions together to drive the optimal outcome for everyone? So there is a lot of innovation needed to decide what data we should be collecting and creating, and some rethinking to do in how to align our analysis with the most important business questions and making sure that the analysis we do is good enough without over-investing in it. And we just talked about new ways of driving innovation in the way that we make decisions using data and analysis. But all of them require a balance, new and old data. Good enough, but not too good. Owning the role of the decision designer without usurping the role of the decision maker. And the process of managing that balance leads us to everyone's favorite topic, governance.
It's always me. It's always me. You know, Gareth, it's not that bad, okay? It's not that bad. However, what I do know from 25 years of talking to all of you is that governance has a, let's just say, a bit of a bad reputation. Clear the room with the word, in fact, kind of reputation. But if we want to innovate, we really do need to do governance. Governance is just the process of deciding how to get things done. It's about aligning your capabilities to desired outcomes. So start with your capabilities. What are your data analytic capabilities? What's everything you've got? It's the people, it's the processes, it's the technology, it's the data. What are your outcomes? Your outcomes are the business impact of everything you do with your capabilities. And we need to start with our potential, not with our limitations, not with saying no. So governance begins by thinking about our desired outcomes. And that's great, because stretching ourselves with demanding goals is a proven technique for driving creativity and innovation. So what's your goal? Did you come with one? If you did, I'd like to challenge you to stretch that goal. Quadruple it, make it bigger, make it brighter, make it better. And if you didn't come with that stretch goal, why don't you try and leave with one? Something that scares you a bit. Something that you have no idea how to solve. Because that scary, stretchy goal is going to break down the barriers in your own head, the barriers to innovation.
We don't always think that setting goals must be a part of governance, but we should. Because no matter how much we might say, governance is not about control, that's like saying, do not think of an elephant. What are you thinking about right now? Bet you're thinking of an elephant, right? All that saying governance is not about control achieves is to link the idea of governance and control more firmly in people's minds. It is a self-reinforcing failure. Most of the time, we do associate governance with control, and therefore think that only our most sensitive data needs governance. But all data needs governance, just not the same kind of governance. It's like saying all vehicles need fuel. Some may need gasoline, some may need electricity.
And Gareth, some may even need oats and hay.
You always get your horse into the present.
I always do.
Every time.
How do I do it?
Okay, I'll concede. Governance is about control when you are playing defensively, addressing regulations, or managing risk. This is where topics like data security or data privacy become important aspects of data governance and bring associations of control. Now, many early CDOs thought of their role exclusively in terms of data protection, and the control style of governance was well suited to that role. But only that role. One size fits all, or best practice, which is the polite way of saying one size fits all, is a fantasy for control freaks. The most important thing to remember about governance is that it comes in different flavors. What we call adaptive governance, with different styles for different business scenarios. Adaptive governance is about making sure any constraint fits the context. Governance is about enabling agility and innovation in some contexts, but it's about control in others. And there is a temptation to think that we can be more creative without those governance people telling us what we can and cannot do. Being able to do whatever you want brings a type of freedom.
But freedom without governance is anarchy. That was my horse. This is not my dog, okay? This is a bad dog. We may be more creative without any restrictions, but innovation requires, remember, it requires execution, not just creativity. And adaptive governance tells us how far we can push the boundaries in being creative. while we still ensure that we can deliver the innovation inspired by that creativity. If we want governance to enable innovation, then we need to use strategic governance as the way to align with our most ambitious goals. Using adaptive governance techniques stretches the boundaries of what you can do in your experimental and proof of concept phases, while relying on the control style to ensure that what you deploy aligns with your organizational principles and the law and all that. If governance is the thing that's holding you back, you're doing it wrong. Governance is the way that we balance freedom to break, or bend, at least, the rules, while we're being creative, ensuring that we can deliver on our creativity. Good governance ensures that innovation is achievable. Do you feel better now, buddy, about the whole G word? Okay, good.
Talk me around.
Okay, good.
So we began talking about how this world of perpetual uncertainty requires us to be innovative, but also makes our organizations receptive to the changes that we can enable. So how will you make the most of this opportunity? How can you be innovative in what you do and how you do it?
Okay. For the rest of the conference, and when you get back to the office, we want to encourage you to consider how you can innovate in how you source data. Don't just be a data plumber. Be a data concierge. Focus on knowing where to find the best data, the right data, the smart data that we can turn into a productive asset. You should also think in terms of creating data, synthetic data, and not just collecting it.
Explore how being both data scientists, who are great at finding the best answers to questions, can combine well with being a data artist, who is great at asking the most profound questions. That's how to achieve the greatest impact. And think about what good enough looks like. Do you know when to stop crunching the numbers?
And as we look to unleash innovation across our organizations, remember that data alone is unlikely to drive decisions. To ensure that data can be applied to decisions, we need to design decisions by embedding data into our business and technology processes.
And I can't believe I'm saying this, you do need adaptive governance to combine safety with innovation, providing the flexibility to experiment safely with control forms of governance to control risk.
So, we've given you a lot to think about, which we hope will guide you this week and when you get back to work. But in these last few minutes, we want to address the final barrier, the final constraint to innovation. Us. When it comes to unleashing innovation, we can be our own worst enemy. Just like Tycho Brahe, we rely too much on our expertise to drive our thinking, rather than challenging ourselves to think in different ways. Remember, both Brahe and Kepler had the same data, but only one of them was able to change his thinking to take advantage of it. And when he changed his thinking, he changed the world.
So when you leave this room, we want you to be looking to unleash your personal innovation. Now, you may have noticed that we used a wide variety of metaphors as we talked about different topics. Are we data plumbers or concierges? Is analytics an art or a science? Augmented analytics is like a swarm of drones. Governance comes in different flavors. It doesn't really matter which one works for you. Metaphors are not supposed to be accurate. They are supposed to be wrecking balls for the constraints in our own heads. To paraphrase the statistician George Box, all metaphors are wrong, but some are useful.
We unleash innovation with imagination. We transform uncertainty with analysis. It doesn't really matter what metaphor we use, because the new perspective that it brings forces us to revisit our old certainties and opens up being innovative. So during the day today, we would like to challenge you to find 3 random things that you can use as metaphors, and use those metaphors to rethink whatever aspect of data and analytics is important to you. And share it with each other, share it with us. I'll get you started. A simple glass of water. Is it half full or is it half empty? Or maybe if you've seen Jurassic Park, is it a dinosaur detector? Need Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was scared of dentists and the dark. I was scared of